Just a few words about myself and our company. I'm the CEO of Plataine. We're a software company. We specialize in aerospace and software for aerospace manufacturing. I'll talk about it, our technologies, our approach using what's coming around today as IoT, Internet of Things, and AI, artificial intelligence. We're talking about software solutions that are in production. So this is not some science fiction, futuristic prototypes. This is something that's working in production with several of the industry leaders today, such as Airbus and GE. And we're partners with companies such as Siemens and GE Digital, their software arm as well. We're coming from a combination of mathematics and computer science on the one hand, but also manufacturing excellence on the other. And our team has been and is visiting dozens, if not over 100 sites globally in the past couple of years. So a lot of these are lessons learned over time and bringing best practices into the solution. We're taking the approach of a digital assistant, or precisely an intelligent digital assistant. Now, the example I like to use is those navigation systems that we use every day. And I'd like to start with the word intelligent. The purpose, right, is to drive value, is to give intelligent recommendations or instructions of what to do. And often the question is, how do you determine if something is intelligent? Well, practice says it all. If you're using it today and you like what it says, then you'll be using it tomorrow. So in the navigation area, we've come to a pretty good level where we use it all every day and don't even second guess the recommendations. It says turn left, you turn left. You don't even think about a traffic jam or the alternative, basically taking it in and using it day to day. Now, what really makes it work is 2 or 3 main things that I'll discuss. One is the mobility, the connectivity. It's connected, it's collecting data, it knows things that you and I otherwise would not know or would take a long time to measure. The other aspect is the software, is the algorithm that is able to take this information, process it, and give good insight or good recommendation. And the key is in real time. The third is usability. We're talking about people, whether it's a user interface or sometimes machine interface is a different question. Now, coming from the consumer world to the business or manufacturing world, the question is, why do we even need this stuff? And the simple answer is because manufacturing, or specifically in aerospace, is hard. If it were easy, it would be a lot easier. Here's the core problem that we see around this. This is back to economics 101. If you have the production volume from left to right and the unit cost on the vertical axis, people expect to see economies of scale. What they really see is the red line. First, as they grow, things get better, they're in control, but at some point, the whole thing falls apart. The main reason is very manual intensive processes, very cumbersome processes, paper-driven, that are very hard to manage at rate, at scale. And what's behind that is the inherent limitations of the systems out there. You have your ERP and PLM poorly connected, requiring a lot of manual input, a lot of blind spots, and not really making a lot of decisions on their own. If you think about it, your ERP has never gave you a recommendation or never made a decision. It all's been put back on yourself. The result, by the way, is this. We see this a lot. These are all testimonials from our customers, or at least their prior condition. Starting with lack of visibility, production supervisor, not knowing what they have on the production floor, then you're starting to get some insight, some feeling for maybes. Production bottlenecks may be causing us such and such damage per year. Then you move into the disaster realm. NatCap failures, loss of contract, $1 million of expired material. That's a true story. Won't tell you who, but this is what happens when things fall apart. Now, our goal is to capture that difference between the potential and the reality. And again, in this discussion, we'll give a quick case study and some examples of how this can be done. When we talk about digital assistants, we're really looking at 3 pillars. And I want to put this here in a more, condensed form and explain the logic of how our approach is from both a, let's call it, computer scientific point of view, but also from a very practical point of view. The first pillar is collecting data. We need as much data as possible. And IoT, Internet of Things, in this respect, is a massive enabler of data. Prior to that, we'd have paper, which is really useless for software, or maybe some terminals keying in data. IoT creates a new level of data collection a lot of information in real time, and perhaps trivially speaking, in digital form. The second pillar is cloud computing. We need that today in order to process and store that amount of data. Again, it could be like a public cloud or a private cloud. That's not the point. The point is the availability of mass computing power at a very low cost. But the third is the AI, the algorithms, the software that can use the cloud computing in an intelligent fashion to process all the data that we've just collected. So we see here a set of enabling technologies that are used to solve one problem. And if you look at today, this day of age, as compared to what we had 10 or 15 years ago, these technologies now enable or give us power that we could not have before. Sensors today are more robust and less expensive than they've ever been. Cloud computing is very cheap today. CPU and storage are somewhat of a commodity. And of course, the availability to run those kind of computing power is new. I won't be able to name the company, but I guess you can guess. We're talking about a rather big composite fabrication facility doing jet engine parts. The main challenges were around the problem of cost of poor quality. That's a very broad term that has a lot of derivatives. Waste and rework, a lot of material shelf life, errors or issue because they're calculated manually, low yield, late deliveries and bottlenecks, which of course hurt the process downstream, and a general issue with not so great quality audits. The reason for that is the existence of massive amount of papers documenting the entire process. So we'll talk about all of these, and I'll give some examples of how this would work. So let's talk about the prepregs as the first example, and we call it the material and inventory assistant. This is a simple illustration, right, of a composites process from left to right, the freezer through the processing machine. In this case, it's a hand layup, all the way through the autoclave. You see here also the illustration of the sensors tracking the progress. In this case, by the way, it's the use of RFID, generally available technology, very robust today. And RFID tells us where stuff is. Now, if we're tagging the materials and we're tagging the kits or the parts, and I'll talk about the difference in a bit, we know where they are, and we can deduct from that their expected shelf life. We can give alerts on shelf life, and of course, the outcome, the benefit, is the reduction of waste. Now, the second concept I'll talk about today is the difference between an alert and a recommendation, and we'll get back to that in the next slide. How do you pick the right material for the right job? First of all, you need to know what jobs you have today. That exists in the ERP. The ERP gives us the schedule. Today we want to make 7 of those and 15 of those and 21 of that other part. The ERP, remember, lacks any knowledge of how you make the part, what are the materials or other requirements. That's on the engineering side, PLM or CAD. So the CAD system will tell us this is how you build this part, and these are the materials and restrictions and everything else. Now we know how to make it, and now we need to pull material. How do we know which material is suitable for which job? So if we're tracking the materials, we know their sizes, their location, and their expiration status. First of all, we can give an alert. Hey, Mr. Supervisor, or hey, Mrs. Warehouse Manager, you have a problem. This material is about to expire in 20 hours, 50 hours, whatever the threshold is, and I'll talk about that later. We are now raising an alert. This already demonstrates a lot of value. By the way, the formal term is predictive analytics. I predict that this material is about to expire. And I'm helping them, I bring it to their attention, the assistant brings it to their attention, and now they need to solve it. The better thing to do is take it another step forward into what we call, or others call, prescriptive analytics. I'm giving them the solution. Hey, Mrs. Supervisor, you have a problem, but here's how you solve it. Now, how do I know how to do that, or rather, how does the software know how to do that? Because it has the big picture, it has the full context. We know what needs to be made, we know how you make it, we know the actual status of materials and tools and others on the production floor, and we can make a complete decision with that. So here you see the example of optimal material selection, but you also see the two variants going up from an alert to a decision. Another use case is the tool management assistant or tool management process. We're tracking the tools, we're tracking their locations, we're tracking their production cycles through the autoclaves. And we can raise an alert. this tool needs maintenance. How do we know that? I'll get back to that later. We could raise the alert, but of course if the tool is maintenance and it's pulled off the line, then we could and we should hold back some of the production orders that are based on that tool. This tool, its availability, is driving a lot of the scheduling decisions and actual execution, and we need to be aware of that. The alert or the maintenance cycle is driven by the tool spec or by some form of expectation, and we can get better at that. But if you're being proactive about it, then you can better plan your process, and I'll get back to that example. So here's another quick example by basically knowing where the tool is, not just for the sake of finding it, which is quite a challenge to begin with, but actually following its process and quote-unquote understanding the situation. If you notice, I'm using a lot of human-oriented terms and examples that are rather intuitive, but remember, this is software. Let's talk a bit about the digital thread here, or traceability. Now, what's unique about manufacturing as a whole, and certainly the importance of aerospace, is if we're in a logistical operation, we're moving stuff from left to right, or from one building to another. In manufacturing, we're making something new. And this is obvious, but it's very deep. If we take raw materials and we produce a kit, then this kit, let's use the parent-child analogy. The materials are the parents, and the kit is the child. Two things happen at that point. The first thing is now we have something new to track. We want to tag that child, that kit, or put a sensor on it. The parents may go back to the freezer, and pardon the analogy, they may be consumed altogether. But the point is the parents have a different life. They may go on and produce other children, but this child now is a separate entity. The other thing that happens is the DNA, the genealogy. This child now inherited a lot of the parents' DNA. Their supplier, the batch number, the remaining shelf life. If a roll of material or a bucket of resin had 100 hours left, so does the child at that point, and that child must reach the autoclave or the curing cycle before the clock runs off. So you can imagine we're maintaining this data for operational alerts and recommendations, but now we're slowly building the entire family history of the part. The kits will have children, the part, and multiple parts will have grandchildren, the end assembly, and so forth. As the production cycle progresses, we have all the information of the family tree and all the information of the history of every parent in the process. This is how it looks like, by the way. And you see here one material producing multiple kits, and from a given kit, we can produce a part. How does this come into play? Well, first of all, traceability, right? If we need to audit this, we have a full digital record of what's going on and who's who, and how much shelf life remained on which material, and who touched it, and who qualified it, and who extended the shelf life, and so forth. The other aspect here is the ability to navigate this data structure, typically replacing a ton of paperwork. You're in production, a part fails, quality check. You run it through testing, you realize it's down to faulty material. You can go back, identify the source material, and then find all the parts' siblings or cousins for that matter. Doing this through a computer structure or with a digital assistant makes it a lot faster. Typically replaces a process that takes days or sometimes weeks. On the flip side, a supplier reports a bad batch or a bad material. Now you need to find all the children of that material. This typically takes a few days of running through paperwork and checking every part on the floor. During these 3 days, one continues to make essentially more garbage, more scrap. And at the end of all this, they're often not sure that they found everything. This concept, by the way, can extend also into the services lifecycle. When a part's already on an airplane and we need to run through the same analysis, work that we're doing with GE. So the way to look at it is with a little assistant on your shoulder, helping you through all of that, proactively identifying these issues in some cases. I want to take another example from ply cutting. And here you see a very common case, but I like this example because it's very visually understandable, but also encompasses a lot of these concepts together. Today or this week or this shift, we need to make 3 parts. Parts 100, 200, and 300. They each require different plies, but this is the schedule for today. Now, we know from the ERP, this is the schedule. We know from the PLM that these are the plies and directions, and we also know they all require the same material. Now, the typical process we see is very static. Every time you need to make part 100, you go out to the engineering department or the network drive, you pull off the cut plan, this is the nest, in other words, and you make the part. If coincidentally you need to make all 3 parts together, hardly do we see the manufacturing planner combining them into one process. And then they're all each cut separately and then laid up on 3 different tools. Now, if I know the schedule and if I know all of them are on the same material and I know all 3 tools are available, I can do this. I can combine, or at least propose to combine, all 3 parts to be cut together. This represents perhaps some challenges on the kitting side, which we can address or talk about later. But the point is, this is a dynamic decision made in real time, think Waze or Google Map, taking in the actual situation. Tomorrow, for example, we may not need to create all 3 parts, or the next day, maybe not all 3 tools are available. So every day represents a different issue, and every day represents a different result. The ability to act in real time really takes the software, requires the software which can help. We're all human, and the number of CPUs that we have and attention span to these problems is very limited. And this is what it's really about. In manufacturing, it's never that simple. We have different considerations and a trade-off to balance, but it always comes down to the rules of the business. You have a given order that requires 15 meters or yards of material. Do you use a single roll, or do you pick up 2 remnants? Which one is better? Well, the common answer is, it depends. And different manufacturers will give us different answers. Follow the logic here. It applies to a lot of technologies, not just ply cutting. But maybe I should use the remnants, just get rid of them. But if you notice, they actually take up more material. But, it's good practice to use the remnants first. But what if the remnants expire in a month? Maybe we can save them for something else. But what if they expire tomorrow? Well, definitely use them now. So a lot of these factors come into play, and at some point, it's just too much to handle. And every day is different, and beyond that, the questions are driven by the rules of the business. Now, this is very important because every business is different, every production line is different, and this is not a hardwired academic exercise. You have two jobs, one for this week, one for next week. You can cut them together and save material, or you can cut them separately and create WIP. And what's better? It depends. But this ability to handle all these considerations and all these parameters requires the software computing power to handle those. Putting this into play drives real numbers. And the better the organization is handling their current process and measuring it, the more we can derive specific outcomes. But we're talking about increased throughput and capacity, typically driven by higher automation and less rework. The reduction in scrap, the savings in raw material. The process automation as a core driver for quality control. Now, the reduction in labor cost doesn't translate typically into less manpower. It typically means that the same people can do better things and support the growth of the company. And of course, the aspects of the digital thread. I want to talk a bit about kind of some of the terminology that's floating around in terms of AI. And a lot of the things I heard is that, how do we do analytics and terminology like machine learning, et cetera, on the production floor. So the first thing you need is data, but you don't always have data, or at least not in a structured manner. So if I look at the material shelf life problem, for example, I demonstrated before, we can start with a very simple threshold, 20 hours. Give an alert at 20 hours, or for this material at 20 and that material at 40. This is very simple. It's based on what we call tribal knowledge. We've been doing that forever. Why? Because we know. This is a very rough estimate that sometimes is too early, sometimes is too late. We can even make it even more intelligent and say, we can integrate to the PLM and process and know that this material requires 50 hours of process and that material requires 20, and we can do that too. Over time, we collect data, and we can correlate the materials with their process time, and we can identify better how much they really need. Is it 50 or is it 46? We can add to that, beyond the expectation for, let's say, 50 hours, the actual situation. If we predict a bottleneck downstream, we need to give an alert even earlier. So the more data we have, our ability to process and learn from it grows, and then our assistant becomes more intelligent. Another very interesting direction, just to piggyback on one of the earlier examples, is with tool tracking. When do you maintain a tool? Well, some companies just don't really know. They just do it whatever, every 10 cycles. Sometimes there's a spec around the tool, but again, you don't want to do it too early nor too late. So with enough data on quality outcomes and tool maintenance cycles, you can develop the right or optimal recommendation for the maintenance cycle. If you do it too early, you're underutilizing your tool. If you're doing it too late, you probably created a quality issue, in essence too late. So you want to find the right time. So what you see here is the progression from an early configuration and the ability to learn and become more intelligent. This is something that we've started to work with some of the bigger OEMs and tier ones. And this is a concept of virtualizing the digital thread up to the supply chain level. If we're doing everything I just talked about at the site level, and this site delivers a part, let's say a tier 2 to a tier 1 or a tier 1 to an OEM, I can deliver the physical part with the virtual copy, often referred as the digital twin. So when the customer gets the part, they can pick up that digital copy and continue the traceability from that point on. In this respect, from a software perspective, on a central cloud or data center, we don't care for the physical differences between the two sites. You know, my shipping station is just one stop before your receiving station. And at the end of the day, we're able to integrate the entire process. For traceability perspective, for sure, already today. And the next step is, again, creating this mass amount of data that we'll be able to introduce even more analytics to. So this is a project that we've already started with GE and with Airbus. And this is showing very promising result, but perhaps we can talk about it more with a concrete study next year. So that's pretty much it. Thank you. And any questions? Okay. Well, that's a great question. It's a concern. It's a concern we're hearing a lot. And it comes down to requirements or standards. Now, frankly, we're not seeing a lot of standards out there. The bigger companies are able to produce a set of requirements from their InfoSec, information security departments, and we have to show how we adhere to those. From our perspective, when we deploy the solution on a cloud level, then we're able to produce the requirement information security, let's say, measures that we use. We're also doing this, or able to do this with ITAR control data. Different cloud providers, such as Amazon and others, have ITAR compliant data centers. And in some cases, we just put it within the network of the customer. And then there's a question of their integration or interfaces with their suppliers. So there are ways to handle this. There are ways to address this, both from an IT perspective and also from data integration perspective. It's doable, but when I'm presented with that question, my response is, tell me what I need to comply with, and I will. Okay. It's a good question. It's also a question of technology, but also a question of business. From a technology perspective, our goal as a software is to build something that's easily configurable to address a wide range of problems. Now, the further we deviate from a core problem that we solve, such as, let's say, in this case, the composites production cycle, the more configuration, or in some case, even customization that you need. With our mileage today in the industry, I'm quite proud and happy to say that our solution is very flexible to accommodate that. We've really seen a lot of different cases, and over the years, being able to support multiple processes. Can you take this system and put it into a Coca-Cola factory? Probably not. So, when we manage our own resources in R&D, we try to be focused on types of processes or types of industries. And by the way, not just in composites and not just in aerospace. So you can take the same composites processes to other segments like wind or automotive, or have very similar processes within aerospace or otherwise that are not composites. The classification is we're looking for industries that are complex, that have a variety of products, high mix, low volume orientation, and in that cluster, the problems are, in general, quite similar. Yeah, that's exactly the promise, and that's exactly the value. By the way, the question is value to whom? And it's typically the guy, the OEM, right? You're right, and you can extend the question also into the services landscape. A part comes off an airplane, it's flying, and something's wrong with the part. They figured out that somebody's been using the wrong tool, revision B versus revision A. Now let's find all the other parts that were made that day or that week with the same tool. So whether it's the feedback loop within the manufacturing process in one site, across the supply chain, or even in the field, it's the same concept. This is by far one of the most powerful promises of the digital thread. Okay. Well, it does. First of all, we need this integration. The ERP provides us a lot of information, such as the production schedule or other factors like cost, and we want to integrate back some of the data that we've been processing and using. Technically speaking, it's rather simple, actually. Whether the APIs, it depends on the ERP. The APIs could be as simple as exchange of text files. In some cases, we could do more robust interfaces with part of the technicalities with HTML calls or otherwise. At the end of the day, it's rather straightforward. I know ERP integration has a bad history, but the interfaces today are quite simple, and we've been able to handle that.
Okay, well, thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.